So picture this, it's 1492, and there's this Italian sailor who's absolutely terrible at math. He's about to sail off into the unknown and accidentally stumble onto an entire continent nobody in Europe even knew existed. And this one screw-up is going to turn Spain into the wealthiest, most dominant power on the planet for the next 4 centuries. I know that sounds insane, but stick with me because that's legitimately what went down. Let's rewind a bit. Back in the 1400s, Spain wasn't even a thing yet. The Iberian Peninsula was just this messy collection of different kingdoms. Castile over here, Aragon over there, Navarre doing its own thing. They were completely separate entities with their own rulers. Oh, and for nearly 800 years, Muslim kingdoms called the Moors had controlled huge portions of the peninsula. The Christian kingdoms spent literally centuries trying to reclaim this land. We're talking generations upon generations of warfare, battles, sieges, the whole 9 yards. They called it the Reconquista. Fast forward to 1469. 2 royal kids get hitched, Isabella from Castile and Ferdinand from Aragon. Now don't get it twisted, this wasn't some romantic love story. This was cold, calculated politics. When you marry off royals from 2 powerful kingdoms, you're essentially merging empires. That's empire building 101. By 1491, Isabella and Ferdinand had successfully booted out the last Muslim stronghold in Granada. After 8 centuries, the Reconquista was finally over. The whole peninsula was now under Christian control. With their home turf secured, they started looking elsewhere for opportunities. Here's the thing, everyone in Europe at that time was completely obsessed with Asian goods. Spices, silk, all that luxury stuff from the Far East. Problem was, all the trade routes were monopolized by Venice and the Ottoman Empire, and they were price gouging like crazy. Portugal had already started trying to sail around Africa to reach Asia directly, but that journey was taking absolutely forever. That's when this character Christopher Columbus enters the picture. Columbus was from Genoa, and he came up with this pretty radical proposal. Instead of sailing south around the entire African continent, why not just head west across the Atlantic? His thinking was simple, the Earth's round, so if you keep sailing west, eventually you'll loop around and hit Asia from the other side. Here's the catch though, Columbus was genuinely awful at math, like really bad. He drastically underestimated how big the Earth actually is. He thought Asia was way closer than reality. When he pitched this idea to Portugal, their royal mathematicians basically laughed him out of the room because they knew his calculations were garbage. But when Isabella and Ferdinand heard about it, they figured why not take a shot? So Columbus set sail on August 3rd, 1492 with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. His crew was absolutely terrified. They legitimately believed they might sail off the edge of the world or run out of food and water in the middle of an endless ocean. 2 months pass. Then on October 12th, they spot land. Columbus is 100% convinced he's reached the East Indies. That's literally why he starts calling the native people Indians. He genuinely believes he's somewhere near India. In reality, he's landed in the Bahamas, but he has absolutely no idea that he's just discovered a massive continent that Europeans didn't even know was there. He pokes around the Caribbean for a bit, checks out Cuba, Hispaniola, then sails back to Spain with the news. When he gets back, Isabella and Ferdinand completely lose it. They immediately bankroll a second, much bigger expedition with 17 ships. Columbus ends up making 4 voyages total, gradually mapping out more of the Caribbean and even briefly touching the South American mainland. But get this, when Columbus dies in 1506, he probably still thinks he found a western route to Asia. He never fully grasped what he'd actually accomplished. Now his discovery immediately creates this massive territorial dispute. Spain claims all this new land. Portugal says, hold up, we've got rights to this too. The 2 nations are on the brink of serious conflict. The Pope has to step in as mediator. In 1494, they hammer out the Treaty of Tordesillas, which basically draws an imaginary line down the globe. Everything west of the line belongs to Spain, everything east goes to Portugal. At the time, everyone assumes this gives Spain the entire Americas, though it turns out Brazil ends up falling on Portugal's side. Spain doesn't waste any time. They immediately start building permanent settlements across the Caribbean. Santo Domingo, established in 1496, becomes the first proper European city in the New World. More towns pop up throughout the early 1500s. Once they establish Havana, Cuba becomes Spain's primary operational base in the region. But the Caribbean islands are just the appetizer. The real prize is the mainland. See, Central and South America weren't some empty wilderness. Far from it. There were incredibly sophisticated civilizations that had been developing for literally thousands of years. The Maya had constructed these amazing cities. The Olmecs had built complex, organized societies. These were advanced cultures with developed agriculture, stunning architecture, structured governments, the works. When the Spanish show up, the regional superpower is the Aztec Empire. They're running most of what we now call Mexico from their capital city, Tenochtitlan. And this city is absolutely mind-blowing. It's built on a freaking lake, accessible only only through these massive artificial causeways. When the first Spanish conquistadors lay eyes on it, they can barely process what they're seeing. It's larger and more sophisticated than most European cities of that era. In 1519, this conquistador named Hernán Cortés decides he wants in on that wealth. He launches out from Cuba with a relatively small military force to investigate the mainland. Cortés is clever though. He doesn't just charge in guns blazing. As he makes his way inland, he actively recruits allies from indigenous groups that despise the Aztecs. Groups like the Tlaxcalans, who'd been brutally oppressed under Aztec rule for generations. They're more than eager to partner with the Spanish to overthrow their oppressors. When Cortés finally reaches Tenochtitlan in November 1519, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II doesn't know what to make of these bizarre foreigners in metal armor-wielding weapons that literally breathe fire and thunder. Some Aztecs even start wondering if maybe these strange visitors are gods from their ancient prophecies. Cortés exploits this confusion brilliantly. He essentially kidnaps Moctezuma and attempts to rule through him as a puppet. This incredibly unstable situation somehow holds for about 6 months. Then it all goes sideways. On June 29, 1520, Moctezuma gets killed, most likely by his own people who view him as a collaborator and traitor. That same night, the Aztecs violently expel the Spanish from the city. Cortés and his men have to make a desperate escape, abandoning virtually all the treasure they'd accumulated. But Cortés isn't done. He spends the entire winter regrouping, recruiting even more indigenous allies, and preparing for a second assault. By spring 1521, he's back with a vengeance, laying siege to Tenochtitlan. The siege drags on for 10 brutal weeks. The Aztecs fight ferociously, but they're facing an invisible enemy they can't possibly defeat: European diseases. The Spanish unknowingly brought smallpox and other infections. The indigenous population has zero natural immunity. We're talking millions of people dying in successive epidemic waves. Those who survive the diseases then have to face the combined Spanish and Tlaxcalan forces. When Tenochtitlan finally falls, the Tlaxcalans are absolutely merciless in extracting revenge against the Aztecs. The Spanish tear down Tenochtitlan and reconstruct it as Mexico City. It becomes the administrative capital of what they dubbed New Spain, their first major colonial territory in the Americas. But Spain's nowhere near finished. Way down south, high in the Andes Mountains, there's another major civilization, the Inca Empire. They control massive territories spanning modern-day Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. Two conquistadors, Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro, set their sights on conquering them. Their initial attempt in 1528 doesn't go particularly well, though they do manage to introduce those devastating European diseases that decimate the population. Pizarro returns in 1531 with official royal backing for a fresh expedition. The Inca conquest ends up dragging through most of the 1530s. Unlike the relatively swift defeat of the Aztecs, subjugating the Incas takes years. The Inca Empire is more geographically dispersed across incredibly difficult mountain terrain and operates with a more decentralized power structure. To make matters worse, the Spanish conquistadors start fighting amongst themselves. Pizarro and his brothers lead one faction, while the Almagros lead another. They're literally waging a civil war with each other while simultaneously trying to conquer the Incas. Pizarro himself ends up getting assassinated by Diego de Almagro II in 1541. Despite all this chaos, Spain gradually establishes control. They set up their colonial administration in Lima and formally established the Viceroyalty of Peru in 1542. Pockets of Inca resistance continue into the 1570s, but Spanish dominance is firmly established. With these two enormous conquests, the Aztecs and the Incas, Spain now controls the absolute heartland of the Americas. And they keep pushing. Spanish explorers venture into what's now the southern United States. Hernando de Soto explores everything from Florida to Texas. Others head south. Juan Diaz de Solís charts the area around modern Argentina and Uruguay. Pedro de Mendoza establishes Buenos Aires in 1536. Spain even expands beyond the Americas entirely. When Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigates the globe between 1519 and 1522, he encounters an island chain in East Asia. They name it the Philippines after Prince Philip. In the 1560s, once Philip takes the throne, Spain dispatches a military expedition to colonize these islands. They conquer the main island of Luzon and found Manila in 1571. Now Spain's got territory stretching literally from the Americas all the way across to Asia. Running an empire this massive isn't exactly cheap. Spain needs absolutely enormous amounts of money for soldiers, ships, colonial administrators, infrastructure, everything. Fortunately for them, they basically hit the lottery. Shortly after conquering the Aztecs and Incas, they discover absolutely massive gold and silver deposits throughout Mexico, Bolivia, and Peru. The silver deposits at Potosí in Bolivia, discovered in 1545, are almost beyond comprehension. Over the following 200 years, that single single location produces roughly 80% of the entire world's silver supply. Spain mines these resources incredibly aggressively, relying heavily on forced indigenous labor under horrific conditions. The precious metals get transported to coastal ports and then shipped back to Spain in enormous treasure fleets. There's so much gold and silver pouring into Europe that it actually triggers massive continent-wide inflation. Historians call it the price revolution. Suddenly there's way more precious metal in circulation, which devalues currency and drives prices up everywhere. As more Spanish settlers continue arriving in the colonies, colonial society becomes increasingly complex. Most colonists are men, typically younger sons of noble families who won't inherit estates back home and are seeking their fortunes. Since very few Spanish women make the journey, these men frequently marry indigenous women. This creates a growing mixed-race mestizo population. Spanish becomes the dominant language, Catholicism the dominant religion, and a rigid social hierarchy develops based primarily on ancestry and birthplace. Enslaved Africans are also brought over in large numbers, particularly to work the profitable Caribbean sugar plantations. By the 1600s, you've got this incredibly complex mix of different ethnic groups and social classes all living under Spanish colonial rule. But here's where things start going wrong. Despite all this incredible wealth, Spain begins experiencing serious problems. First off, the gold and silver production starts declining by the early 1600s. The easily accessible deposits are getting depleted. Second, Spain's spending money way faster than it's coming in. They're constantly involved in expensive European wars. King Philip II declares bankruptcy 4 separate times during his reign. For times, that's spectacularly bad financial management. Third, Spain's rivals are catching up fast. France, the Netherlands, and England start establishing their own colonies throughout North America and the Caribbean, claiming and settling territories that Spain had technically claimed but never actually occupied. England seizes Jamaica in the 1650s. The Dutch and French grab various other islands. Spain's iron grip is starting to slip. By the 1700s, Spanish colonial settlements are well established, stretching from northern Mexico all the way down to Argentina and Chile. California and Texas start receiving increased attention. Franciscan missionaries establish a chain of settlements along the California coast that eventually becomes San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. In the major colonial capitals like Mexico City, Lima, and Buenos Aires, social tensions are escalating. You've got peninsulars, people actually born in Spain who come over as colonial administrators. You've got criollos, people of pure Spanish ancestry but born in the Americas. And you've got mestizos, people of mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage. The criollos and mestizos increasingly resent being governed by Spain. They start thinking they could run things better themselves. Spain's empire is clearly in decline by the late 1700s, but the real trigger for its collapse comes from events in Europe. In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte decides to take direct control of Spain and install his brother Joseph on the Spanish throne. This creates a massive legitimacy crisis. If the legitimate Spanish monarch isn't actually running things, why should the colonies remain loyal? Revolutionary leaders across Latin America seize this golden opportunity. José de San Martín in Argentina, Bernardo O'Higgins in Chile, Simón Bolívar in Venezuela and Colombia, Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico. They all launch independence movements between 1808 and 1810. What follows are prolonged, bloody wars of independence that continue throughout the 1810s and into the 1820s. Royalist forces loyal to Spain battle revolutionary forces fighting for independence. But gradually, one by one, the colonies break free. Bolívar liberates Venezuela, Colombia, and Panama, establishing Gran Colombia in 1819. He then pushes south and frees Peru with a decisive military victory in 1824. Argentina declares independence in 1816, Chile in 1818, Mexico in 1821. By the mid-1820s, Spain's vast American empire has essentially disintegrated. All they've got left are Cuba, Puerto Rico, a handful of small Caribbean islands, and the Philippines in Asia. Spain clings desperately to these last remaining colonies throughout the 1800s as symbols of their former greatness. But independence movements continue growing stronger. The final chapter begins with the Cuban War of Independence in 1895. When the United States intervenes in 1898, the resulting Spanish-American War is brief and absolutely decisive. Spain gets thoroughly defeated. They're forced to surrender Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. All three come under U.S. control in various forms. And just like that, after 400 years, the Spanish Empire that began with Columbus's confused, accidental voyage comes to an end. From a newly unified Spain in 1492 to a global superpower controlling 3 continents to a gradual decline culminating in total collapse in 1898, the Spanish Empire fundamentally shaped the modern world in ways we still see everywhere today: language, culture, religion, political borders. It's a pretty stark reminder that even the mightiest empires eventually crumble. But their legacy, that endures forever,